Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. We continue our previews this week with beat writer Austin Meek from The Athletic. He'll join us on our game day segment in just a few minutes. Believe it or not, the team already has 1 week of practice in the books. On Saturday, they practiced in pads for the first time. Only 3 weeks to go before New Mexico, and there is a lot of work yet to be done. Expectations are sky high for this team. I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether that is realistic or we're maybe expecting too much this year. My listener lines are open 24/7 to hear your thoughts. Call 313-351-2631. That's 313-351-2631. Tell us your name, where you're calling from, and then share your expectations for this fast-approaching season. On Monday, Michigan media members had the opportunity to speak with a couple of key players on this year's team. Edge TJ Guy was asked how this year's defensive front stacks up against last year's outstanding personnel.
It's going to be the same product, different numbers, different guys out there. We got a lot of depth, a lot of talent out there, so it's going to be fun.
Gio El Hadi had his share of struggles last year, as did the offensive line. But he says he is bigger and stronger this year because he's been taking better care of himself.
Last year I played very light. I had a bad camp. I didn't take good care of myself. I was playing around 300, 305. Right now I'm about 325, 330. Eating a lot. Just in general, like the way I was drinking water, drinking about a gallon, 2 gallons a day. I sweat a lot. You know, big guys, you guys know how it is. Like, we sweat a lot. It's like a job, trying to eat that much and drink that much. And it took me a long time to learn that. And now I got pretty good. I got a good little rhythm, and it's going good.
My guest today says he's not sure just how good Michigan will be this year. There are so many unknowns. What he's sure of is the defense should be very good, and the offense, it has to be better than last year's. Up next is beat writer Austin Meek from The Athletic. So stay with us. Joining us on the show today as we continue our previews of the fast-approaching season is beat writer Austin Meek from The Athletic. Great to have you back with us, Austin.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Well, Austin, we're not quite a week into practice yet, but the beat writers have had the opportunity to hear from some of the coaches and players, and I know we don't get much at these pressers. You sort of have to read between the lines, as always. But what were your thoughts on what Wink Martindale had to say about his defense just a couple of days ago?
Well, I think you can tell there's just a comfort level with Wink Martindale and his players this year and in year two that's different than last year. There clearly was an adjustment process, I think, for everybody last season for Wink Martindale, coming from 2 decades in the NFL, figuring out how to communicate with college players, what you can expect of them, what you can put on their plate, and for his players, figuring out how to communicate with him, how to really master the concepts in his defense. And it took Michigan about half a season, I think, for all of that to really settle into place. But then once it did, about halfway through last season, you saw the result. And so the big difference for Michigan this year is they're already, at that point of being on the same page, speaking the same language, got a lot of guys back in this defense who played for Wink Martindale last year. So there's a sense from everybody, from Wink and from the players, that they're just starting from much further ahead this season compared to where they were last year.
Interesting to hear his thoughts. And then he was followed up by first-year offensive coordinator Chip Lindsey. He talked about the quarterback battle and more, which we expected. What did you come away with after listening to his presser?
I think they're looking at this quarterback competition as, in some ways, this is the competition they hoped that they would have in the spring. When you've only got 2 quarterbacks, there's certain things that you can't do. And Chip Lindsey even mentioned, they had to cut back on some of their individual periods in the spring because there's only so many only so many throws you can ask those guys to make in one practice.
Yeah.
So when it was just Bryce Underwood and Jaden Davis, they were somewhat limited in terms of what they could put their quarterbacks through. And now they have 4, maybe 5 quarterbacks that they can rotate in there with Jaden Davis, Bryce Underwood, Meeechigen, Jake Garcia, the transfer they added from East Carolina, and then Chase Herbstreit. It's more like a traditional quarterback rotation now. And I think they're just in the early stages of camp. They really just want to get a look at all of those guys and roll some different guys through there in different situations. I think they're very much in kind of the evaluation period and doing some of the evaluation that they just didn't get a chance to do in the spring because a couple of those guys either weren't here or in Meeechigen's case weren't fully healthy.
Well, on Monday, we got to hear from senior edge TJ Guy and graduate lineman Gio El-Hadi. I thought what Gio had to say about his struggles last year was interesting to hear, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was eye-opening for me as well, to hear him talk about the differences in how he's taken care of his body this year, his weight. You mentioned he played about 30 pounds lighter last season, partly because he just didn't focus on his diet and his hydration the way that he is this year. He said, it was eye-opening to me that he said he would lose like 10 pounds of water weight in a practice.
Yeah.
And you gotta drink a lot of water to replace that every single day. And he said he just wasn't as disciplined as he needed to be in terms of making sure he was eating enough and drinking enough to maintain his weight. And he ended up playing lighter than he wanted to. And he thought maybe that contributed to not being as dominant last season as he wanted to be. So this year he's playing up around 330, but you can tell just looking at him, he looks noticeably bigger than last year. And so, yeah, I think all of that together, he really came across to me as a guy who realizes this is probably the last go around for him at Michigan, his last year. And he really wants to do everything he can to make the most of it.
Yeah, that's what I came away with too. Well, the preseason coaches poll was released on Monday. We're taping on Tuesday right now. And, they're always fun. They don't mean as much as they used to, certainly. But, this time of the year, fans love it. Michigan was ranked number 11. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, I think, top 15 is kind of where Michigan has been in most of the preseason rankings I've seen. We'll see where they're at in the AP poll. It feels to me like a lot of people are maybe not really sure what to make of this Michigan team.
Yeah.
And maybe kind of splitting the difference between what this team could be in the best case scenario and what it could be in more of the worst case scenario. I think you look at this team and there's definitely a scenario where this is a top 10 football team. I think the defense is clearly good enough to be top 10 caliber. The offense is more of a question mark, but with a quarterback as talented as Bryce Underwood and the 2 running backs that Michigan has, I think the offense could, if everything comes together, be a top 10 caliber offense as well. But there's also a lot of question marks that are lingering from last season. Some of the things that contributed to Michigan ultimately being a team that finished outside the top 25. So both of those possibilities, I think, are on the table for this team. And to put Michigan in that top 15 range, I think is kind of, it's sort of a safe middle of the road projection for this team. I'm sure there are, if you want to be bold, you really want to, go out on a limb. There's probably some people who are going to, say this is a top 10 team, a playoff team. And probably some people who are also going to make the case that maybe Michigan is a little bit overrated to be in the top 15.
Really hard to tell this time of the year, but again, the polls are fun. And Texas ranked number 1, Ohio State number 2. Of course, they get together very early in the season. Penn State at number 3. Big expectations for Coach Franklin and the team. Oregon number 7, and as we mentioned, Michigan number 11. I was surprised Illinois was at number 12, and then Indiana came in at number 20. But that at least gives you an idea how the coaches perceive the Big Ten as a darn rugged conference, isn't it?
Yeah, Illinois is the team that I'm very interested in. They have 16 starters back from a good team last season that was just outside the playoff discussion last season. Ended up beating South Carolina in a bowl game. Luke Altmaier is back at quarterback, should be one of the top quarterbacks in the Big Ten. So I think, Illinois as a top 15 team and a playoff contender, I'm buying Illinois. I think that they're in a good spot there, and of course at the top, Ohio State and Penn State. That's going to be a fascinating race to see if this is the year that Penn State finally gets over the hump.
Yeah.
Interesting to me that Ohio State is still, a step ahead. Obviously they're neck and neck in the polls, but I mean, on paper, Penn State brings back a lot more than Ohio State does, but also, Ohio State's really dominated that series and is coming off a national championship and certainly has some really good players back. So it'll be fascinating to see how those two teams develop as the season goes on and how that race between those two teams shakes out.
Mm-hmm. Well, speculating is what we do in August because we don't learn really anything until we see the teams tee it up. So let's speculate on this Michigan offense for a few minutes, Austin. At this point, what we think. I mean, Sharon said last week, it's a competition at quarterback. We knew he would say that. Your thoughts, though, on that competition, Austin, and maybe when Michigan might name a starter?
Well, I thought it was interesting that Sharon Moore said, even as he was emphasizing that it's still an open competition, when he was asked what's ultimately going to be the factor that determines who the starter is, he said it's going to be the guy who grabs the team. And when he said that, I thought, well, I think we know who that guy is right now. I mean, there's no question that Bryce Underwood has grabbed the team. Talking to any player on the team, any player in the program, really from day one in the spring, you can just tell, talking to people, that Bryce Underwood does things at the age of 17 that just leaves his teammates in awe, So if it comes down to a question of who's really taking the reins and earned the trust of the team, I think it's pretty clear to me that Bryce Underwood has done that. Now, that doesn't mean that the competition is over or that there's no opportunity for anybody else to push Bryce Underwood, because I think Sharon Moore and the coaching staff clearly have created that situation where they want Bryce Underwood to be pushed and they want to give Meeechigan and the other quarterbacks every opportunity to push him for the job. It's hard for me to see any other outcome for this quarterback competition than Bryce Underwood ultimately being the guy.
Yeah, and you mentioned that he was 17 years old, and when you think about him being in control of the team and the huddle, I think he turns 18 in the next couple of months, or next couple of weeks, actually.
August 19th.
Yeah, I mean, that is a lot to put on a kid's shoulders, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it is. And I think we've seen quarterbacks come out of high school, and even the guys that you look at as can't miss prospects. I think about a guy like Dylan Raiola at Nebraska. He went in there with such big expectations as a 5-star quarterback. In some ways, Dylan Raiola was the Bryce Underwood of last year's class. Mm-hmm. And we saw from him as a freshman that there's going to be some ups and downs, and guys who are going to go on to be star quarterbacks, make a lot of money in the NFL. Sometimes the freshman year is still an adjustment. And I think it's reasonable to expect that for Bryce Underwood. I don't think anybody's expecting Bryce Underwood to come out there on day one and be a finished product. You live with some of the freshman mistakes because you know that he's only going to get better with every game he plays. And even if there are some ups and downs, I think the natural talent that he has, and he's going to make some plays that are going to, I think, make you, sit up in your seat and say, wow, because there are not many quarterbacks in the country who are more talented than Bryce Underwood.
Well, we mentioned a few minutes ago that what Gio El-Hadi had to say about his personal expectations for this year. But the offensive line as a group has to be much better, and we know that, don't they? I
think that was one of the biggest disappointments for Michigan last season, is that those guys who are returning from that unit have been pretty open about the fact that they didn't play up to the standard of a Michigan offensive line. And it is a really high standard. Michigan's been one of the best programs in the country in building dominant offensive lines. And it wasn't that dominant last year. That it wasn't that dominant unit that we're used to seeing. Now they had some moments. They got better as the season went on, but start to finish, it didn't come together the way we've seen from Michigan offensive lines in the past. And so they've done some things to address that. I think bringing in Juan Castillo as an analyst, a veteran offensive line coach, coached great offensive lines in the NFL, having that veteran presence there as maybe a mentor for Grant Newsome, as just another mentor for the players. I think that's been part of it. And I also think it's just the players taking ownership. Guys like Gio El-Hadi, who realized that they didn't play up to their standard last year, and they've really taken it on themselves to set a tone this season in preseason camp of it's not acceptable. The standard at Michigan is really high, and those guys, I think, are motivated to try to hit that standard this season.
Well, if the offensive line makes strides, and we expect them to during the season, and stay healthy, that's always the key. They're deep with a lot of talent, unproven talent right now. But the running game should be able to take off and, I hope anyway, carry this team, especially early, shouldn't it, Austin?
Yeah, I think for all of the intrigue around Bryce Underwood, I mean, we're all, I think, we can't wait to actually see him out there and see what he can do. But it may be that the real story for this team, certainly early in the season and maybe all season, is going to be how good can this running game be? Mm-hmm. And if the answer is, this is one of the best running games in the country, which I think it could be, then you don't need Bryce Underwood to go out there and carry the offense from day one. That would be the ideal scenario for Michigan, is that you can ease Bryce Underwood into the job and really lean on your running game. Michigan has two running backs that I think are more than capable of leading the offense, with Jordan Marshall and Justice Haynes. And so it's really going to come down to the guys up front, I think. And can this offensive line be that dominant run blocking unit like Michigan offensive lines of the past? Can they open the running lanes for those explosive plays that Michigan has really hung its hat on in the running game? And we know Chip Lindsey, that's his bread and butter as well. He wants to run the ball. He wants his offense to be explosive on the ground. His offenses at North Carolina were really throughout if you look back at his whole track record, he's always had explosive run games. I think Michigan has the personnel to do that, but it's going to come down to those guys up front, whether they can lead the way for that running game to be dominant again.
Yeah, a lot of questions on the offense, as we've been mentioning. Tight ends, that's another question to me in the receiver group. At the tight end spot, there's a lot of depth, albeit inexperienced. And then the receiving core competition, it's going to be really interesting to watch what comes out of that, isn't it?
Yeah, when you look at the passing game as a whole, and the wide receivers and the tight ends, I think we all know that from a wide receiver standpoint, the production just wasn't there for Michigan last season. They really were heavily reliant on Colston Loveland as the number one target in the passing game. When he wasn't out there, the passing game struggled. Guys struggled to get open. Well, Colston Loveland, top 10 pick, playing for the Chicago Bears, that obviously leaves a big void. But Marlon Klein is a guy that we've heard about the last couple of years that, if not for Colston Loveland, if he wasn't playing behind one of the best tight ends in the country, we would have seen a lot more of him. And what we have seen, he looks like he's ready to step in and be the next great pass-catching tight end at Michigan. The physical ability, if you saw Bruce Feldman's Freaks list that came out this week, where he goes around the country and identifies the most physically talented players in the country, Marlon Klein was the highest rated Michigan player on that list, which tells you just, the combination of size and speed and quickness he has is elite. And he's just got to put it all together this year and translate that into production. But if Marlon Klein can do that, and if Donovan McCulley is the guy that Michigan thinks he can be, then that answers a lot of questions for this passing game. Because you need that guy at tight end who's going to get open and make plays in the passing game.
Mm-hmm.
And you really need that guy at wide receiver who can go up and get the ball, a big play threat that Michigan didn't have last year. I think they feel pretty confident that they found that guy in Donovan McCulley.
Well, as we've been saying, no one knows how good this offense is going to be. There are a lot of unknowns. We've just tossed a few of those around. But I think the one thing we can say with certainty is this offense is going to be better than last year's, isn't it?
Yeah, there's no question, especially the passing game. In a way, it's somewhat amazing that Michigan did what they were able to do last season, beating Ohio State and Alabama to end the year with a passing game that really was near the bottom of the FBS the whole season in production. The quarterback play, it was a limitation all season. Wide receiver was a limitation all season, and Michigan managed to, even with those limitations, end the season on a roll. And so now you look at this team, and those limitations are not going to be there with this team. Bryce Underwood, the sky is the limit. He can be as good as he wants to be. The wide receiver room, still some question marks there, but you've got guys, really high ceiling players, whether it's the freshman or Donovan McCulley. So, yeah, I would certainly expect this offense to be better than last year. To me, it's a question of, is this year kind of a baby step forward? Is it a small step forward, or is it a big leap? If it's a big leap, then I think we're talking about a team that's going to be in the college football playoff. If it's a small step forward, maybe we're talking about, 2026, that's going to be the year. We'll see. But no question in my mind that this offense is going to be better.
Well, we've spent a lot of time talking about the offense because that's where the question marks are. But let's move over to the other side of the ball for just a minute. At Wink's presser, he seemed very much at ease and confident when talking about his unit. I mean, the corners are still a question mark to many that watch the program, but outside of that, this is a very deep and talented group, isn't it, Austin?
Yeah, I think the front seven should be one of the best in the Big Ten for sure, probably one of the best in the country, even though it's going to look different up front. You don't have Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, obviously, but really the thing we've heard consistently going back to the spring is that Michigan feels extremely confident in those next wave of guys stepping into those positions, even if there's not a top 10 draft pick waiting in the wings behind Mason Graham. A guy like Rayshon Benny, I think there's huge expectations for him to have a breakout season. Trey Williams coming from Clemson, I think has really just fit in there perfectly on that defensive line. And then you got some young guys behind him, as well as Damon Payne, the transfer from Alabama. The edge guys, Derek Moore and TJ Guy, we know about them. Even losing Josiah Stewart, Michigan should still have two dominant edge rushers. And that linebacker group, I think, is really good with the two starters coming back, Ernest Hausman, Jayshawn Barham. And then Cole Sullivan, I think, is a player that we've heard a lot about. There's a real buzz about him. I expect to see him on the field a lot. He may not be a starter, but I think he's the type of player that Wink Martindale is going to find a way to get him on the field because he's just too good to keep him on the bench.
Well, most observers mention that this year's schedule sets up much better than last year's for Michigan. Which I find interesting because we still don't know what kind of a team this is going to be. But that's what makes Week 2 down in Norman very interesting, Austin. That should give us very early a much better idea of just what we have as a team.
It's an interesting schedule for Michigan from the standpoint that they're going to have to be able to win on the road. They have 6 road games. Last year's schedule was very heavily loaded on home games. This year's team is going to play 6 road games, and that's going to be a challenge. And as you mentioned, Week 2 in Norman, I mean, that starts it off right there. You got to go into one of the tougher venues in college football against a program that I would say similar to Michigan is a program that has a lot of potential, but also kind of still finding its way. Yeah. So I think that Oklahoma game is a huge kind of early fork in the road for both of those teams. And then Michigan's, they're going to go to Nebraska to open Big Ten play. They're going to be at USC. They're going to get their frequent flyer miles this year. But the other side of that is, the schedule does look manageable in the fact that there's not a ton of ranked teams right now on that schedule. There's a lot of teams that are middle of the pack in the Big Ten, teams that may jump up there and, challenge to finish maybe in the top 6 of the league. Really, until you get to Ohio State at the end of the season, there's not a team on that schedule that you look at and say, well, that's a top 5 team. That's definitely a playoff team. And a lot of teams kind of in the middle, fighting to be in that conversation. But teams like Michigan that go into the season with some questions.
Well, Sharon got somewhat of a pass in his first year on the job just because of, how that all went down with Jim leaving and boom, he's the head man. So who knows how many games he'll be suspended this year. We don't know that yet. But would you say it's too early in his tenure at Michigan in this new environment of college football for this to be considered a pivotal year in his career?
I don't think it's ever too early anymore. Maybe there was a time in college football when you felt like you don't really start evaluating a coach until year 3, but I think that time has passed. In this era of college football, frankly, every year is a pivotal year. Doesn't matter if it's year 1, year 2, especially at a program like Michigan where the expectations are so high. There's no season there's no mulligan, I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
And even for Sharon Moore, last year, obviously, it wasn't the season when you look at it as a whole that Michigan hoped for or expected. They started 5-5. There were a lot of people, at kind of the halfway point of last season who were not real happy, frankly, with the way that Sharon Moore was managing that transition. But the way things finished, the win against Ohio State, the win against Alabama, signing Bryce Underwood, those 3 things, I think, completely flipped the conversation for Sharon Moore. A lot of people who were maybe a little bit nervous about things felt a lot better based on what happened at the end of November and into the off season. And so now I think it sets up for Sharon Moore that it's not a playoff or bust season. As you mentioned, there's the uncertainty about the suspension. We expect it to be at least 2 games, but quite possibly more. This season is not the ultimate measuring stick for Sharon Moore. I think it's a lot more about, does this season set up Michigan for 2026, 2027 to really get back to being a team that competes for national championships? And if that's the takeaway from this season, then I think people will feel really good about the direction under Sharon Moore.
So final question before we let you get away, Austin. We should get the NCAA verdict on Signgate in the next few weeks. Everyone is hoping, the fans, the program, I'm sure. And that would be a huge monkey off this team's back. Whatever the final verdict is, everyone wants a lid on this, don't they?
Absolutely. That's the one common theme. Everybody I've talked to, they just want this to be over. They just want some closure. It's gone on now almost 2 years, which is just the unfortunate part of the NCAA infractions process, that these things drag on so long. And the consequence of that is that, it becomes a distraction for players who may not even have been in the program at the time when all of this stuff was going on. Michigan's got a new head coach. The roster looks completely different. And so, from the Big Ten to Michigan, all the way down, everybody's just ready to have some closure. But, I'm sure that as we know, like, these things don't go quietly. Whatever the outcome is going to be, there's going to be people who probably say Michigan got off too easy. There's going to be people who say, this is egregious. The NCAA overstepped its bounds. I'm guessing that nobody's going to be happy. That's my one guarantee with this process. It's probably not going to please anybody. But the one thing that I think everybody will be happy about is when we can finally put this thing to rest and move on.
Amen to that. I think everyone will be very satisfied when that day comes. Here with us today as we continue our previews of the fast approaching season has been beat writer Austin Meek from The Athletic. Austin, always a pleasure to have you on the show with us. You've been very gracious with your time, and we look forward to getting you back as soon as we kick it off for real.
Hey, always enjoy coming on. Look forward to chatting with you again during the season.
On Quick Hits today, no injury news has been released during the first week of camp, and that's always good news. We'll continue to have media availability with coaches and players the next couple of weeks. Not that we'll learn much, but it's always interesting to hear what they have to say. Once again, we'd enjoy hearing your thoughts and expectations for this team. Our listener line is open 24/7 at 313-351-2631. That's 313-351-2631. Tell us your name, where you're calling from, and then weigh in with your opinion. We'd love to hear it. That does it for another show. We'll be back next week with another season preview, and then starting the week of the opener, we'll return to twice-weekly programming. On Tuesdays, we'll have our Visitors Edition. Then on Thursdays, our Michigan Game Day show. So I hope you'll join us, not only next week, but all of this coming season. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!